Hey, y'all. I'm sorry, it started talking to me, and then it was like I had a stroke right in the middle of the sentence. I'm so sorry. Uh, Hi, y'all. My name is Jennifer Huddleston Kelly, and I am an alcoholic. I've been kept sober since December 5th of 92, and that's my miracle. And the Frisco group in Frisco, Texas is my home group, and it's an honor and a privilege to get to be here. I really am. You don't know how badly I need this meeting. I need this meeting, and I've heard my talk. I just need to be around you. And so I really, really thank you for those of you who have your cameras on so that I can see your shiny faces, and especially for the talking before the meeting. That just always lifts me up. This has been a little bit of a week, and we'll get to why, but God has been showing up in my life in a really big way. And it's the kind of thing that when people told me this was possible when I was new sober, I was like, no, absolutely not. That matching calamity with serenity kind of thing. And that just sounded crazy. That sounded crazy because I'm a calamity girl. If there's not calamity going on, I'm creating it. And now most of the time my life is pretty calm, even when things are not going the way I wish they were. And so I'm truly thankful. I also, I know this is TMI, but I have not felt well today. So if I get up and run off, it's because I absolutely have to. I'm my favorite speaker. I will not leave unless I absolutely have to, but I'm just telling you, this will be the fun. We'll just see if I can make it through the hour. Who knows? I also want to give a shout out. One of my sponsees is here. Brownie points for you, Pumpkin. Okay, so I'm supposed to tell you in a general way what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now, and I'm terrible at it in a general way. I am obviously an oversharer. And the cool thing is, this week I was talking to somebody about, I have always had secrets. Since I could talk, I have had secrets. And so to be able to live out loud and not have to chase down stories and revise things and, oh, well, you must have misunderstood, and I can't let this person talk to that person because they heard two totally different things. To be able to just say whatever I say and know that to the best of my ability, I'm telling the truth is a freedom that I didn't even know I wanted. So I was born at a very early age on November 16th of 1966. I was born to a football coach and an English teacher. My parents were not drinkers. My parents were the kind of parents who met, they dated, they got married, and they had sex in that order. And that was a big deal to them. That's the kind of folks that I grew up with. I jokingly say we had a mixed marriage. My mother was Baptist. My father was Methodist. So we were Methodist anyway. So and I was happy and healthy and well adjusted. I was undoubtedly loved. I was given absolutely everything that I think a human being needs to be successful. Only I drink different than 9 out of 10 drinkers. I had an Al-Anon friend who used to say, "You're the kind of drunk that I hate," because I'm the kind of drunk who went to church every Sunday and had dinner on the table and went on family vacations and just did things pretty Mr. Rogers. And my parents provided me with a very happy and safe life, but I wasn't having it. My favorite story as a little girl was Peter Rabbit, and I was grown and sober before I found out that's a cautionary tale. Who knew? I thought Peter Rabbit was a role model. I mean, I just listened to that story and I thought Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail are having no adventures whatsoever. But Pete has seen some stuff, and if you followed me around and watched, you'd see that was always the kind of kid I was. I just was always attracted to the kids who were hanging out in the parking lot, or the weirdos that, the theater kids or the smoking kids or whatever. But I could glom onto pretty much anybody and turn into who I thought they wanted me to be. I'm kind of tofu, I'll take on the flavor of whatever's around me. And I've noticed that many of us have that ability, which makes it very difficult to become who you are because there's a lot of sifting to figure out who that's going to be. So I'm happy and healthy and well adjusted right up until right around the time I turned 3. And my parents brought home a bouncing baby resentment, and I blamed her for the next 30 years for everything I did. She was the kind of girl who went to the same schools, went to the same church. We were potty trained in about the same way. And she turned out completely different, completely different. And she went to high school and graduated. She went to college and graduated in 4 flipping years. How old am I? I'm 55 and I'm a sophomore. And I'm probably gonna die a sophomore. So college algebra 1 is what I'm saying. So but my little sister, after she graduated, she chose a career. She went to go work for Jesus in Bulgaria. My sister was a missionary. And I was a cocktail waitress in a pool hall. So we were both doing God's work in our own way with the poor and downtrodden. I was just bringing them home, trying to fix them up. I do love me a fixer-upper. And while my sister was in Bulgaria, she met a Bulgarian man. They met, they dated, they got married, and they had sex in that order because that's the rules. And that's what she did. She played by the rules. But I just wasn't that kid, and nobody can really tell me why. I can't tell me why. And I know that when you're brand new, it sounds like this part of our story is to explain why we're alcoholic. And the truth of the matter is, why we're alcoholic has everything to do with our reaction to alcohol. It doesn't seem to have a goo gob to do with our surroundings. Because you'll find out in the 200 people, have I thinned the herd yet? There's about 200. Oh, there's more. We'll thin them later. Anyway, there's like 200 people in here, and you'll find out that there are people who had 2 parents at home. There were people who had 1 parent at home. There were people who were raised by wolves. There were people who had a religious background that they loved. Some had none, so it just doesn't seem to matter where we come from. What happens is what happens when alcohol gets into our body. And that may happen at the first drink, and it may happen several years in. I sponsored a gal who she was very ambitious, and she did a lot of things while she was drinking. And she was like the most physically fit alcoholic I've ever heard about, 0 body fat, running marathons. And her story is she could do that for a very long time. And then one day she couldn't. And she got a DWI on the way to her Christmas party in the morning at a bank, which I love. I mean, that's just a yummy alcoholic story. Because every time I hear her talk, I watch the room, and people are like, what is she doing here? Because it sounds like this is just, she's on the right road doing the right stuff. And she did, right up until the day she couldn't control and enjoy her drinking. So really and truly, this stuff that we talk about, where we came from or what happened, it's just so that we can make some connections, so that at some point I'm going to hear somebody's story who sounds a lot like me. And because I'm going to hear a story that sounds a lot like me, I may become convinced that this solution could work for a drunk like me. That's absolutely my story. At the first conference I ever went to, I listened to a speaker, and I related to every word out of her mouth. And half the room was like, she doesn't even finish a thought, because she was boink, 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 boink. And I know you're shocked. Why would I relate to that? Because I've already started one direction and zigged right back over here. But anyway, but I heard her talk, and she got sober at 26, and I got sober at 26. And the night that I heard her talk, she was 26 years sober. And I walked away from that meeting knowing that somebody like me could stay sober for 26 years. I didn't know if I could, but I knew that somebody like me could stay sober for 26 years. And I'm coming up on 30 now. Try to tell me God doesn't work. So anywho, so I'm growing up in this family, and I'm just intense, and I'm sensitive, and I'm intensely sensitive, which is why I learned how to be funny, because most of the time my brain is eating my face off, and I don't know what to do with that. So I just acted like I meant to be that way on purpose. And it was a nice way to kind of deflect from that belief that I've always had, which is I'm not enough. And I don't know where that belief came from. It's certainly not what I have heard. No one ever said, Jennifer, you're not enough. Many, many people have said, Jennifer, you're too much. No one has ever said you are not enough. And yet I've walked through life being driven by this idea that I just can't shake, that I'm just not enough. And if I don't make a big deal out of me, no one will even know that I exist. And so these are the character defects that I brought to my alcoholism. I was a liar long before I was a drunk, and I was a thief as soon as I had pockets. I got better. No, I don't know if I got better at it. I did those things more frequently because it became necessary when I drank. So I'm going to tell you about my first drink, which is an annoyingly long story, but I had fallen in love with this boy who moved to town, and he didn't know about me. So he had that going for him. My story begins with a boy because boys are where it's at for me. My problem is I scared the fish. I discovered boys around second or third grade, and boys discovered me in 2007. So most of my life is kind of a road runner episode where I'm Wile E. Coyote and I'm running after stuff that does not want to be caught. And yet this guy moved to town. He was from Jackson, Mississippi, and he was pretty, and he still is. Oh, he was pretty. I checked. Oh, pretty. And he found me fascinating. And so we started dating, and I wanted to keep him forever because not only was he pretty, but we hated the same people and we were disillusioned by the same things. And we both loved to shoplift. So, I mean, we had a future in organized crime. You know, we were just going to Bonnie and Clyde it up. And we already had a little racket going at the mall. And so I decided that not only do I love him as only a 16-year-old girl can, but I've got to get him on lockdown before anybody else discovers him. And what I come up with is that he is going to need to deflower me. At that point in my life, I had decided that I wanted to be a minister, but I kind of thought, if I'm going to spend the rest of my life talking about sin, I should try some. And I decided he would be my introduction to sin. And if we had sex, we'd have to get married because that's in the rules. Nobody else knows about these rules. Apparently, I just made them up. But anyway, so we went on this date. We did a little light shoplifting. We were headed off to a romantic bistro, Chili's, and I was driving the car. And so I found a secluded parking lot. And that's when I made my big move. Now, I didn't know what I was doing because all I'd done was like watch some Molly Ringwald movies, but I figured Mother Nature was going to kick in at any second. And that's when he popped right out of the closet. Super gay. Turns out so gay. And I just kind of missed that little detail. In retrospect, I probably could have figured that out if I'd done a little more sleuthing, but I didn't. And it hurt my feelings real good. And I'm just going to tell you, you know, he was from Mississippi. He was new in town, and he trusted me to tell him. He trusted me to tell the truth too. And I don't know if there's a fun time for a Southern guy to come out of the closet, but I know that the early 80s was not it, because the AIDS epidemic was just unfolding, and he was terrified, and he thought he would be disowned by his family. And he trusted me. And yet I was so selfish and self-centered. I made that all about me. I did not act or react well. As a matter of fact, I spent the next 2 years trying to convince him he wasn't that gay. He is. I checked. That didn't, my conversion therapy did not work worth a hoot. But I got mad at him, and I got mad at God, and I got drunk at them both. Because if being a good girl doesn't get you what you want, I mean, what's the point, y'all? And that was just sort of the way that I thought about it. And that wasn't the only thing that led me to that decision. There were a lot of things. I thought that my faith was supposed to supply me with answers, and it didn't. And I didn't know that what my faith now, what I believe is my faith allows me to live with the questions. I don't have the answers, but it allows me to live with the questions and believe that there is a power that does understand why, and that does have a plan, even in the situations that seem completely out of control. So I got drunk, and I'd been running around with an older crowd, and they were drinking. My friends started drinking in middle school, but I wasn't interested in middle school drinking because that involves nose puking and being grounded forever. And I wasn't interested in that. That was not attractive at all. But as I started running around with some older kids, what I saw was they drank like frozen margaritas out of mugs at Chili's, and these nerds that I was running around with, the more they drank, the funner they got. Suddenly they can flirt and tell dirty jokes. And I'm like, wait a minute, I must know of this magic elixir. And I became obsessed with drinking before I even had a drink. And I started asking a million questions about drinking, and it shut me up. This friend gave me 2 bottles of wine, and I drove it around with it in the back of my dad's Cutlass. And it's so funny because it was Boone's Farm Tuckle Pink and Real Sangria. It was terrible wine that has never seen a grape. And it was hot. In Texas, we do this just oppressive. Satan says, no, it's miserable here. I'm going to Tennessee. I'm just saying it's awful. And And so I put it in the back of that car, and that heat starts cooking that wine that's never seen a grape. And I can't really explain it, but it seemed to me like it took on some kind of meaty quality when we first started drinking it. But me and my friend Susie were spending the night at Yolanda's house, and Yolanda was fighting with her boyfriend back when phones were on walls, and she wasn't being any fun at all. And that's when I remembered the 2 bottles of wine in my dad's trunk. And I asked Susie if she wanted to get drunk, and she did. And Susie was a teeny tiny drill teamy girl who I was so jealous of. And all I knew was that I wanted to be better at drinking than Susie. I just want to win at something. And it wasn't going to be shaking my pom-poms or doing the splits, you know? So I decided that drinking would be a competitive sport and I was going to win. And any good alcoholic knows if you're going to compete with someone, don't tell them it's a competition. I still do this. Like if we're doing envelope stuffing at Group Conscience, I don't tell people we're racing. I just win. That's all I'm saying. And so I'm competing with Susie, and Susie, bless her heart, she's the sweetest woman I've ever known in my entire life. She is still my friend today. And if you ask Susie what happened that night, she will tell you a completely different story. And I don't think that we had, I know that we were in the same room drinking the same stuff, but I also know that we had a completely different experience. Because for Susie, if you ask her about what happened that night, she will talk about blood and urine and vomit and broken glass and just a lot of DNA. I mean, just a lot of DNA. And I'm not saying those things didn't happen. I'm saying, why would you focus in on that part? Because for me, we laughed, we talked, we wet our pants, we puked, we broke a window. I don't really know how. It was magic. It was just all magic. And what Susie didn't know that I knew was that when we started drinking, in my perception, Susie was way up here and I was way down here. When we got 1 bottle of wine in, we were neck and neck. And when I finished that 2nd bottle of wine, I felt like I could take Susie at anything, including shaking my pom-poms and doing the splits. And if drinking made you feel that way too, you'd probably be on a Zoom meeting on a Saturday night. I'm just saying. So that's where my drinking career began. And where it ended was I was no longer going to be a minister. There were jobs and no jobs, men and no men, utilities and no utilities. By day, I alternated 2 different jobs. I was either a preschool teacher or a bartender, which is pretty much the same job because drunks and 4-year-olds are almost the same level. It's just that the refreshments were better at the pool hall. And so I'd work at the pool hall and things would get out of control, as they do when you drink all day. And so then I'd go back to the daycare and eat some fish sticks and do some crafts, but they would get a little rigid about wanting me there every day, fully clothed, ready to function. It was just too much. And then I'd run back to the bar. And meanwhile, I start getting DWIs because that's a hobby of mine. Because once I start drinking, people just don't treat me right. And I got to go places. I got to see things. I got to figure out where I can go, where I'm going to feel okay. And I don't know that dis-ease is in me. It's not about the places we go or who's around. It's that I am not okay in my own skin. And the more I drink, the less okay I get. And I think that drinking's the thing that's making me okay. It's the only thing that's getting me through the day. I don't know. It's the thing that's causing the restless, irritable, and discontent. And once upon a time, it seemed to calm everything down. But looking back, now I can see that it's what created all this chaos. And it lied to me day after day after day. And it's, since there's somebody new in the room, at least one, I want to make it really clear. I didn't understand any of this in real time, like none of it. I have always said, I wish that there had been a soundtrack playing in my life. Like when at those pivotal moments, there should be violins going, duh, so that I know, oh, you are making a really poor decision right this minute. But that's just not what was going on around me. It was more like, I'm just sort of wandering and crashing into stuff and breaking hearts and wrecking cars and lying and stealing. And gradually things get worse. And at first it was funny, and at first it was fun, and it allowed me to flirt and drink and dance. And later on, it turned into something completely different. I turned into somebody who went home with strangers so she could continue to drink. And in essence, I was trading my body for a beer, whether they asked for it or not. I kind of just filled in the blanks on that deal. And that's not who I started out. And I don't think that's who God wanted me to be, but it is where my alcoholism took me. And I no longer have guilt or shame about that. It just makes me sad that there was a time in my life where I just didn't value anything about myself. I couldn't figure out what the big deal was anyway. There's a movie, I don't even know. Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou? And the guy, he trades his soul for a guitar, I think. And usually it's a fiddle, but I think in this one it was a guitar. And they asked him why he did it, and he said, well, I wasn't doing anything with it. And I understand that line still gives me chills, because that's what started happening. Was I just, my soul began to become a burden. It wasn't guiding and directing me. It wasn't where I connect with God. It was just this nuisance. I wasn't doing anything with it. And gradually things got worse. Picked up a couple of DWIs, and I decided that I had a driving problem, because that's what my alcoholic told me. It wasn't my drinking that was giving me trouble. It was my driving. So I got to solve the driving problem. Problem solved. I mean, I still think that's genius. So I moved next door to my bar of choice, and I think I've got this thing licked, because now I can just stagger home on foot. And I forget that wherever I go, there I am, and that I'm bringing alcoholism with me, and it's getting progressively worse. And I don't even know that I have it, because I thought that, alcoholics came from alcoholics, and that they did all kinds of that stuff because they just didn't know any better, that they grew up in the illness, because those are the stories that I had heard before. I hadn't heard of somebody like me. I didn't know that there's plenty of alcoholism further up in my tree, and other things that would qualify folks for a 12-step program of some kind. I just thought I can't be an alcoholic because I'm from these nice people, and because I used to want to be a minister, and because I have a moral compass, and because I'm too smart. And gradually things got worse. On November 19th of 1992, I got a felony DWI coming home from a bar. By then I had moved home with my parents. I had been engaged quite a few times, but never really married, because I'm not a closer. Even in a blackout, fellas can remember fight and flight. And they did both. They fought and flew, which today I can say was absolutely necessary. I just brought chaos wherever I went. And I'm desperately running around trying to be loved enough that I won't be sick anymore. And that's just not how that worked for me. So this last guy that I was engaged to, man, he could hang. He had an alcoholic mom. So he had been through some training, is all I'm saying. And my wackadoodle kind of, he knew that song and dance. And so, we'd get good and drunk, and I'd get mad, and I'd kick him out of the apartment because my parents were paying the rent. Typically I would say I was paying the rent, but let's be honest, my mom and dad were paying the rent. And, so I'd kick him out, and he'd leave, and then I'd chase him, because that wasn't the way this was supposed to go down. You got these stories in your head about how he's going to hit his knees and beg, and he'll never do it again, whatever it is. And instead he'd go, okay, and he'd just head right out. And then I'd have to follow him because I had more information for him. I had planned a speech during the begging part of the show, but instead I got to chase him around the block. And, he'd walk about a block and a half away, and I'd say, and you're not taking my car. Because as I said, I like a fixer-upper. He didn't have a car, which is nice. That creates a little handy little hostage situation. And he'd say, well, I wasn't planning on it, and he was tall and skinny, and I'm short and fat, and we look like spaghetti and meatball going down the street, and I'm screaming and hollering, and he's just like, yep. He's not fighting with me anymore. And I'm sure you guys know that when they don't fight, you're in real trouble, because if they don't fight, they don't care. There's nothing left. There's nothing left to fight for. And I thought that feeling I had when he wasn't responding to all my crazy, I thought that was love. Now I know it was abject terror, because I didn't want to be left alone with me. And so I'd say, get back in there. And he'd go, okay. And he would climb the stairs, and I would pick up all his clothes and put them back on the hanger so that we could play the game again tomorrow. Our neighbors caught on to doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, but we didn't. It was like a new game every time we played it. And I got a head like an Etch-a-Sketch. You shake it twice and there's nothing there. I have a head like a etch a sketch. You shake it twice and I've forgotten the suffering and the humiliation of a week or a month ago. I'm without defense against the first drink, and I have no idea that it's the first drink that's killing me. So on November 19th of 1992, he's gone into the Navy to get away from me, and we tried to get married ship to shore, and instead we just fought ship to shore. He kept forgetting to be faithful, and I kept forgetting to be faithful, and he kept getting thrown in the brig, and eventually I just couldn't pretend that we were going to get it together enough to get down the aisle. And that was when it got real dark, because I no longer had anything or anybody that I felt like was holding me to the planet. And I moved back home to my parents, and I probably drank another year living in their house. And I was holding those poor people hostage. They were terrified. They didn't confront me about my drinking because they didn't know what would happen. They knew things were completely out of control. And I'm so crazy and sick and arrogant that I think I'm not hurting anybody but myself. And they're seeing all of this with clear eyes, but they don't know what to do, because alcoholism is cunning and baffling and powerful. So I get thrown in jail on that felony DWI, and I don't know who to call. Like, I don't know who to call. I've pretty much used up all my friends. And I just sat there for a long time, trying to figure out if I was going to call my parents or not, because they had every right to say, we're not coming. We're just done. We're just done. Your drain isn't dry. Because like many alcoholics, I'll take and take and take and take. And then when you say, I can't do this anymore, I'll blame you for the situation that I'm in. That's how we do it. And so I'm sitting in this jail cell, and I have a moment of clarity. And my moment of clarity was that I could no longer say, what's a nice girl like me doing in a place like this? Because I drank up nice girl like me. It was no longer a mystery why I wind up in jail. It's not my driving, it's my drinking. And I drink because it's the only way I know how to get through the day. And I can't swear to me, God, or anybody else that I'm going to do it different, because I'm pretty sure I can't. Like, I've been trying for a long time to cut back, and I was such a miserable failure at cutting back. I knew there was no way that I could quit. I mean, I just knew. And so I said a prayer in jail, and I made a decision that I was going to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I meant that as sincerely as I've meant any prayer I have ever said. And then they let me out. And I made one little mistake. I didn't run straight to AA. Instead, I started trying to cover up my mistakes. I tried to cover my tracks and make bad look good and get the car out of the impound. By then, I was the assistant director at the daycare, and I was in a little bit of trouble because I kind of forgot to open the daycare on the day I was in jail. And they get real upset about that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I don't even know what kind of crazy story I told them about that. But every attorney in Dallas is sending mail to my parents' home, and I don't want them to figure out what's going on. And I got to get my car out of impound, and I'm going to have to hire another attorney, and I don't have any money. And I keep trying to make myself go to AA. Like, I'm driving around the group. I'm orbiting that thing from sun up to sundown, and I can't make myself go in. I can't imagine life with or without alcohol. I by the time I got to AA, I was sober 10 days, but I was absolutely convinced that I couldn't make it 10 more days. There was no way I was going to make it 10 more days. I didn't have the will or the white knuckles or whatever it was that allowed me to stay sober that long. And so I sat in a parking lot, having accidentally gotten drunk one more time. I didn't mean to get drunk. It was an accident. Now, I did go to a bar, but y'all, I'm not an idiot. I didn't go to there to drink. I just needed to talk to my legal advisor. I had this really good criminal friend who had 8 DWIs, and he was not sitting in jail. He was sitting in the bar. And I figure here's a man with a real answer. I've been trying to force myself into AA, but I can't seem to find the will to get through the door. But all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, this dude, look, he's got way more DWIs than me, and he's still drinking. Why would I bother these nice people in AA when here's a guy who's figured it out? I need to talk to my criminal friend, Jimmy. And so I go to the bar with no intention of drinking. Like, y'all, I'm serious. I knew it was a bad idea to drink. Like, I'm in trouble. I have not been sentenced. I have already done this once before where I get another one while they're waiting to convict me on the first one. That'll make a judge real mad, is what I'm saying. So I know the consequences of my actions, and I'm not going to drink. And I told them that when I walked through the bar. And I sit down and I start talking to Jimmy, and Jimmy has no good news for me at all. He says, Jen, honey, I can afford to be the kind of drunk I am. You can't afford to be the kind of drunk you are, which I found offensive. And because I can't pass college algebra, but I know 8 DWIs is bigger than 3 DWIs. And when he said he could afford it and I couldn't, what he was talking about was money, because it turns out Jimmy was paying his attorney in cocaine. And I didn't happen to have any cocaine. I didn't have 3 rolls of nickels to work with, frankly. And Jimmy seemed to be under the impression that he was going to go to prison for a very long time. They were just postponing the inevitable. But he was real excited for me. He thought this might be an opportunity for me to find a new way to live. I could have kicked that guy right in the baby maker. I was so mad. I couldn't believe he had the audacity to suggest that I needed help, but he was sitting there drinking. And the other thing that happened that night was at some point there was a drink in front of me, and at some point I drank it. I don't remember ordering it. I don't know if it was my drink or somebody else's. I don't know how it got in front of me. And I don't remember drinking it, not because I drank too much that night, but because drinking's just automatic for somebody like me. It's just something I do. If it's there and there's not something in between me and that drink, I'm going to take it. I will take it, knowing it's a terrible idea. It's not like it's a decision. It's just automatic. And that's what happened that night. And when I looked down and realized those empty glasses in front of me, I had drank whatever was in them. I got terrified. I get chills every time I tell this part of the story, because I drank against my will. I drank with a full knowledge of how bad this could be, and I did it anyway. And that's when I knew I had to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, that on my unaided will, there was no way I was going to beat this. No way. And yet I only went to AA to make it look good. You know, I didn't think you had a real answer. I just went because I needed a judge to not throw me in jail for a year. And so I showed up on a Friday night. I walked into the late meeting. It was a 10 o'clock meeting, and they turned out the lights and they lit the candles, and I knew I was in a cult, but I had nowhere else to go, you know. And I sat where the newcomer loves to sit, as close to the door as humanly possible, because I had made a deal with God that I would stay for one whole meeting, but I didn't think I would make it. I mean, I've made lots of promises to God that I've broken. And right before the meeting started, somebody said, "Hey, why don't you come sit down here with us?" And there, you know, as you do, people were sitting in a circle at the other end of the room. And somebody offered me a chair in the circle. And I believe that my recovery began when I moved from the seat that I had chosen to the chair that somebody suggested for me. I think that's when recovery begins, when we surrender our bright ideas and start trying yours, even though they make no sense. I mean, can we just agree this makes no sense? Because I mean, you know, I got in and you guys start talking about stuff and I don't even know what you're talking about. And you're so excited and you're nodding and you're just tickled and I don't even know what you're saying. But why are you so excited to see me? I have nothing to give you. I have nothing to offer. And yet you're just beaming. Today I know. It's because you can fool the fans in AA, but you can't fool the players. And I was just desperate enough that night to be a player in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was fresh out of bright ideas. And I didn't want to die the way that I was living, and I was pretty convinced I would. Now, did I believe Alcoholics Anonymous was the solution to that? Absolutely not. But I didn't have any alternatives, which is a great place for a drunk to be. And so at the end of the meeting, they asked me to share, and I haven't shut up since, you know, and they gave me a hug and a chip and they told me to go to Denny's, and I went to Denny's because they told me to. And I thought that's where you filled out the paperwork to join Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not get any paperwork that night, but what I did get was, I think I went to AA orientation. I've heard too many of us who have had similar stories. Like, I learned some stuff that night that y'all didn't cover in the meeting. Like, you guys laugh at things that are not funny. You share things you should not share. I don't know why they call us anonymous, because you have no volume control and you say stuff like, "Isn't that just like an alcoholic?" And you don't care who hears you. And I am horrified. Like, I am underneath the menu waiting on my moons over my hammy, and I can't believe you guys are just so loud about this. But what I saw there is what I saw here is what I see in meetings all over the place, a fellowship of friendliness and an understanding that is indescribably wonderful. And it creates this little funny little spider web that's just strong enough to catch a baby drunk in it who's desperate. And that's what you did that night at Denny's. You wrapped me up. You just wrapped me up. And you were kind to me. And you told me what to do. And you said, I'll see you tomorrow. And I went home and I prayed to a God that I knew had given up on me with good reason. But you told me that was what I was supposed to do. And I believed you. And so I did what you told me to do. I went to work. And as soon as I got off of work, I went straight to the first meeting I could get to. I walked through the door and a man came up to me and he said, hey, is your name Jennifer? And I said, why? What have you heard? Because it's all about me. And he said, are you Jennifer? And I said, yeah. And he said, did you drink today? And I said, no, I didn't. And he said, welcome to your second day of sobriety. And he set the hook. I mean, I was tangled up in you by then. And the big deal was not that he knew it was my second day of sobriety. The big deal was he knew my name. He learned and remembered my name. And that was just enough to keep me coming back. And I went to meeting after meeting after meeting because of your kindness. Sometimes that's how God's love shows up, is just the kindness of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was telling a story recently to some gals that I work with, and there was this little lady. I was living with my parents, and we didn't have a lot to say to each other. I don't know if I had told them I was in AA yet or not. And this lady invited me to house sit for her, and she had a bunch of animals, and she and her husband were tour guides, and they also sold Amway, and they needed somebody to watch their house when they traveled. And I'm days sober. I mean, I'm not very sober at all, but I'm going to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And I have never felt so sorry for somebody in my life, because she asked me to house sit. And I'm like, only these weirdos would invite a thief to house sit. I mean, that's just, God love a duck. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, And so, but I went over there and I house sat, and I fed her dog and her cat and her bird and the chicken and whatever else they had. They had a whole menagerie. They had this whole warehouse thing. They had converted their garage full of Amway stuff, and there was good stuff in there. They had makeup and skincare and all kinds of stuff. And I'd pick out the stuff that I was going to steal from them, because I mean, they'll never notice. And yet something inside said, you can't steal from the people in AA. They're too dumb. You just can't steal from the people in AA. And I didn't steal from her. I mean, I might steal from everybody else. I'm not going to tell you there are people in this room who know I kept taking stuff, but I didn't steal from the people in AA. And the weird thing was that when they would come back from their trip, without me realizing it, they always left me they always had a little thank you card for me. And she'd have this little bag of goodies that she'd give me. And inevitably it would be the stuff that I thought I might steal. And I started believing in God with dumb little stuff like that, because God kept showing up in dumb little stuff like that. Like, how did she know that I wanted that eyeshadow palette? Because I'd already opened all of them to pick out the one that I liked the best, that I was, someday going to steal. And she gave me the thing that I wanted to take. And I got to be free. And I didn't know how much those secrets and that shame had been holding me back. And little by slow, you guys just loved me into Alcoholics Anonymous. You badgered me into getting a sponsor. I mean, is it Norm? I think it's Norm A who talks about being in AA is like being kicked to death by a rabbit. And that is absolutely my experience. It's just this little erosion of your will, where you just get to these spots where it's like, well, I'm either going to have to drink or do what these dummies tell me, and so fine, I'll get a sponsor just so they'll leave me alone. And fine, I'll meet with you and do the third step prayer, whatever. And okay, I'll make a list, but I'm not writing down everything. You can count on that. And, and then I sit down to do that fifth step with that woman that I don't trust as far as I can throw her. And I read 3 pages, and I'm not going to tell her the thing. And she asks one dumb question, and I fold like a cheap lawn chair, man. That big fat secret just comes flying out of my head. And I can't even figure out how she did it. Or maybe God did it. Maybe, just maybe, she asked the one right question to get me to tell the thing I didn't want to tell. And it wasn't any big deal. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you've had this experience, but my big fat secret made her laugh so many times. My big fat secrets, other people find hilarious. These things have controlled me for years. And my sponsor's just tickled. I mean, she's just tickled because it doesn't make any sense. And it's not a big deal anyway. And little by slow, I start getting better. And little by slow, I start sponsoring wackadoodles. And I don't know what to do, but I know a little more than they do, you know, and they'd call me up and they'd have big questions. And I didn't want to, I don't like saying I don't know. And so what I would say was, you should probably go read We Agnostics. I don't know why I said that. I just liked the chapter, you know, and so I'd tell them to go read We Agnostics. And that worked for years until somebody caught on that I kept telling her to read We Agnostics. And she said, before I called you, I read We Agnostics twice. I was like, oh, crap. Because while they were reading We Agnostics, I would call my sponsor and find out what I was supposed to tell them. And, you know, but little by slow, my life began to change from the inside out. That's what happened. I found the great reality, the last place I'd ever looked for him. I found God on the inside. And once I found that God on the inside, I couldn't wait to share him. I couldn't wait to share them. And man, I sponsored a lot of unsponsorable people, but I didn't know that. You know, God's just going to match you up with whoever you need. And they showed me the baggage that I couldn't carry for the next leg of the journey. So often, God put somebody in my path that mirrors me in a way so that I can see the baggage that's not going to be with me for the next part of the journey. And I think I'm helping them, and instead they're showing me what I'm doing. What I'm like today is I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a sober daughter. And my mom's been in and out of the hospital since 2022 started. She's there now, and she's headed to skilled nursing. And we just don't know if she's going to get better or not, you know? And but I tell you what, I can now say thy will be done, and I don't have an opinion about what that looks like. And I don't know that I could do that before this situation. I don't know. I mean, I've seen the cool stuff God can do, but I didn't want to let go of people I love. You know, that's the stuff that used to keep me awake when I was new sober. How do you stay sober through losing a parent? How do you stay sober when you lose a friend? And I've had the experience, and you just do. And then you help the next girl whose mom and dad are dying, you know, and you find out, and through this, God has just shown up in this really elegant way. I was going to try and trick a sponsee into doing some step work I knew she didn't want to do. And so I convinced her to do some journal writing with me. I didn't need to do the writing she did. And so I said I'd do it too, you know, because I'll take one for the team to get her better. And so I gave her these writing assignments, these journal assignments. And the first one I gave her was, God, here's why I don't trust you. And I, you know, just because I told her I'd do it, I started doing that writing. And I wrote for a page and a half about how I do trust God. And I gave him my whole resume, you know, so he'd know the stuff I do that says I trust him. And then about a page and a half in, we kind of get down to my mom, and that I have single-handedly been keeping her alive through a pandemic. I mean, he should really thank me for all the tireless work I've been doing. And God kind of thumped me on the head and said, not your department. It's just not your department. And during this time, my sister and I got into a fight. We didn't know what was coming with my mom. We had no idea, but my sister and I got into a fight because we're very different people who have lived very different lives, and we have very different beliefs. And there are several topics we cannot discuss. Only I kind of wandered into one. I thought, you know, it was kind of funny, and it started kind of funny, and then, it was not funny. But like most women, if this is going to escalate, let's just do it all. You know, I mean, I got a trash bag full of stuff we can just go over. And we did, and it was not good. But meanwhile, I'm doing this writing, you know, to help this girl. And as I'm doing my writing with God every day, God says, pray for your sister. I'm like, I don't want to. I'm tired of I always have high road. I always have to get on high. I always have to be the first one to pause. Why do I mean, she's a Christian. She's one of them big C Christians. She's supposed to be doing this stuff. Why I always got to. And God said, because you can. Because you can and she can't. And that's all that matters. She's been following you her whole life. Lead the way I would have you lead. And so I started praying for my sister, and this healing that I cannot explain because I did nothing else. I was not going for extra credit. I can assure you, I was not happy about saying the prayers. But this healing began, and I could not have done the last 4 months if God hadn't backed me into a corner and said, you got to pray for your sister. You got to let this stuff go. You just got to stop. I typically travel several times a month. I didn't know my mother was going to wind up back in the hospital. The 2 conferences I was supposed to do in May magically got canceled. I didn't know why. But I'm telling you, God has just continued to make a way for me to do what needs to be done. And I'm an agnostic. I'm the one who wanders around saying, I just don't know. And yet I look back and I see how God puts everything that I need in my path right when I need it. He loves showing off. I'm just saying. And even though nothing is the way that I wish it was, I am happy, joyous, and free. I am happy, joyous, and free. And I can say, thy will be done, and I can mean it. And I get to show up as whoever God needs me to be in the given situation as it is today. And it's all your fault. I'm glad to be here, and it's a good day to be sober.